Hello, this is Mr. Maximus Film, back from a very long hiatus from doing album reviews, and hopefully I can get a couple churned out before Christmas, because then there'll probably be another long hiatus with schoolwork and Christmas and finals and just a lot of crap that needs to get done. So that's why I haven't been really doing album reviews, but today, of course, I am doing an album review. Let's focus here. This is for Pink Floyd's 1975 album Wish You Were Here, continuing obviously the Pink Floyd discography series that I've been doing. Wish You Were Here is the album after Dark Side of the Moon, which I consider Pink Floyd's best album, but a lot of Pink Floyd fans consider this to be their best album, and for good reason. It's a very strong album. Pink Floyd are still on the right path with this record. They're still a very democratic band. Roger Waters has not completely overshadowed the other band members yet, as he's going to do with Animals next. So they're still very democratic. Roger Waters does still write all the lyrics, but they're very good lyrics, and I have no problem with him writing all the lyrics at this point. He doesn't become too pretentious about it yet. But they are starting to break apart, though. But there's still very much a focus, very large focus on the music, and still not completely on the lyrics yet with Pink Floyd, so they're still on the right path. This album is kind of a double concept album. In my opinion, there's really two concepts that really go through the record. There is the concept of the mourning of Syd Barrett. As we saw in the last records, he went insane and left the band, and at this point the band is sort of kind of guilty about their success without him, and they're sort of mourning him and paying tribute to him. And of course, the other concept would have to be the critique of the music industry. Pink Floyd got a lot of success at this point. They were a humongous band because of the success with Dark Side of the Moon going to #1, and they're just really dissatisfied with the whole process of the music industry. So they decide to critique it here and sort of make fun of it in a very dark manner. Only 5 songs in this album, 2 of them being Shine On You Crazy Diamond, Part 1 and Part 2. I think they're actually broken up to smaller parts, but I can never remember how many there are. The first one is 1 through 5, and I cannot remember what the other one is, 6 through something, maybe 10. Shine On You Crazy Diamond opens and ends the album in a kind of nice fashion that creates this sort of very nice finished feel. It does not feel unfinished at all. And the middle songs also play a humongous role in the concepts of the album. Shine On You Crazy Diamond put together as Pink Floyd's longest piece, but I think it was a good idea to break it up so that it's not so daunting to listen to, because often prog rock epics can get very difficult to listen to because they're so daunting, 20-minute songs and so forth. They're still very much progressive rock at this time as well, very progressive. And what this album is certainly their most ambient. This album, more so than any other Pink Floyd album, relies on texture. It's all about the atmospheres. It's all about the synthesizers. At this point, Richard Wright doesn't use the organ as much as he used to, and the synthesizer becomes Richard Wright's most prominent instrument. He uses it to death on this album. He uses it for atmosphere. He uses it for solos. It's just, this album is probably Pink Floyd's most synthesized album, so to speak. And each song has its own kind of universe with the texture. They all have their own different, texture and feel to it. It's all, they're all very long songs. None are 2 minutes or anything like that, or even 3 minutes. They're all very long. They all have their different, textured beginnings and textured ends. They're all very produced, and I like that. I like the texture use on this album. Not to say that the other Pink Floyd albums didn't, but there's such an overbearing use of texture on this album. Getting into the songs, Shine On You Crazy Diamond starts out with 2 synthesizer chords by Richard Wright, and only 2 chords are used throughout the entire beginning sequence. And it creates a sort of mourning atmosphere just right off the bat. It feels like it's Syd Barrett's funeral procession in a way. And David Gilmour comes in with these, blues licks and these blues guitar solos, which are stunning and beautiful. Really sweet bends on all his solos on this album. And eventually, the highlight of this song, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, for me, is the riff at the beginning. It's a 4-note riff, very haunting. It sounds like sort of like the ghost of Syd Barrett is coming back to haunt the band. It's just this 4-note riff. It's stunning. It's beautiful, and they build on it, and the band sort of just explodes. The drums come in, the bass comes in, more guitars come in. It's just this explosion after a couple plays through the riff. And of course, after that motif is played a couple of times, there's more guitar solos. And there's a point in this sort of fanfare of guitar solos by David Gilmour where you think, oh yes, he's finally done with the guitar solos. We can get into the vocal section. And then he just keeps going. And that point is probably the lowest point on the album, is when you just get kind of sick of all the guitar solos. But David Gilmour is still a fantastic guitarist, and these are all still very fantastic guitar solos, but they could have cut down on maybe one of the guitar solos. And then, of course, it gets into the vocal section, finally, after about 7 minutes, and maybe even more. And it's sung by Roger Waters, but there's a heavy sort of harmony effects with gospel singers and David Gilmour singing harmonies too. And it's just a very bombastic sort of tribute to Syd Barrett. And of course, during these sessions, these songs originally didn't start out as a tribute to Syd Barrett, but of course Syd Barrett actually came in, and he was very disfigured. He didn't look the same as he did when he was recording with the Pink Floyd, and so it was very shocking to the band members. So it became sort of a tribute to him, to Syd. As you know, of course, he was a victim of the drug obsession of the 60s. So, and the vocal section, very bombastic, ends with a saxophone solo by Dick Perry, who did the saxophone work on Dark Side of the Moon. Stunning saxophone solo. I think that's also a high point of the opening Shine On You Crazy Diamond, because it starts out very precise and very to the point, very nice, and then it gets more and more progressively chaotic at the end, and they add echo to it, and it just fades into this chaos, which is a really nice segue into Welcome to the Machine, which is probably the most depressing song on this album. It starts out with a synthesizer thing again, with machine clickings and beeps to make you sound like you're in this humongous sort of steam machine thing, which is fitting for the title, Welcome to the Machine. And the acoustic guitar chords come in to embellish it. Very nice. I think it's based off of 2 chords as well, an E minor and a C major, I think. Very depressing, though. And David Gilmour comes in on the vocals, taking the perspective of a record executive, sort of trying to get this boy, who plays guitar to join a band and make some singles, essentially. Talking about how heartless the music industry really is in terms of their artists. They only care about the money. And the vocals are double-tracked to make it sound more inhuman, in my opinion. It sounds very inhuman when he sings the song. Very cold. And it ends with a synthesizer solo by Richard Wright, which is very nice. Once again, he does very good synth work on this album, and it's very dark. And then it ends finally with a door shutting, and you can hear laughter, which is it's a very dark song. It's probably the most depressing song on this album. 7 minutes around, but it keeps you interested with all the sound effects going on. They use it's kind of like an extended version of On the Run, in my opinion, but more concentrated and less experimental. They know what they're doing with the synthesizer, whereas on the Run, on Dark Side of the Moon, they were sort of experimenting. Here they know what they're doing, and they make a very epic song about it. So that's Welcome to the Machine. Have a Cigar is probably the most accessible song on the album, besides Wish You Were Here. Very funky. It starts side 2. Very funky. Lots of layered guitars. Vocals by Roy Harper, in his own distinctive sort of crooning sort of vocals to add to it. Once again, in the point of view of a record executive. So it's talking to, how you're gonna go far, and you're gonna make a lot of singles. You're never gonna die. And and so on and so forth. And it's just a sort of a slap in the face to the music industry at the time. Very good song, very funky. The keyboards on that song are not synthesizers. There's kind of this organy sort of keyboards, and very nice work on that sort of very funky, sort of jammy vibe. The guitar solo at the end of that song is also fantastic. That's probably my favorite guitar solo at the end of the album. In the entire album is the one at the end of Have a Cigar. Then it gets into Wish You Were Here, which is probably my favorite Pink Floyd song, just because of the whole atmosphere of it. Tribute to Syd Barrett. It gets into that theme. Starts out with the radio sort of imitation with radio static. It plays the riff, and it's just beautiful. It's bliss. It's just pure bliss. Very depressing, of course. David Gilmour has flawless guitar solos and flawless vocals. All acoustic, of course. It's just beautiful. It's beautiful. Probably their finest work. Very good lyrics from Roger Waters. I think they were originally written for his grandmother, but turned out to be more of in context to Syd Barrett. Ends eventually with lots of wind sound effects to create this sort of feeling of emptiness and lawning. And then it gets into Shiny You Crazy Diamond, the second chunk of it, which is focused more on jamming and just sort of instrumental effects rather than sort of a big opening. It's kind of less of a big finish, but more of a sort of jamming sort of feel throughout the entire thing. Starts out with a nice bass riff throughout the wind sound effects, and it gets into this sort of instrumental groove. The bass riff is very dark and very nice, and then eventually the guitars come in and everything is just sort of jamming, and it's a very nice feel to it. Then it gets into the vocal section, a sort of reprise of it once again, and the same sort of bombastic feel. And then it ends with a very funky section. That's probably the most funky 70s sounding section on the album. It sounds very 70s, sort of funk vibe going on there. Lots of cool bass riffs, lots of cool guitar solos, and of course a very nice synthesizer solo by Richard Wright. Then it ends with a very mourning sort of synthesizer solo rather than a funky one. And they kind of play on the theme of See Emily Play, a tribute to Barrett, which was one of his songs at the end. And it just has a very nice sort of blanketed ending that creates sort of a feeling. It's a very nice ending. Pink Floyd sure knew how to create a great ending for an album. So that's Wish You Were Here. There's of course, use of layering here, use of ambience, use of synthesizers. It's just their most layered sort of album, excuse me. And it's very strong. It's very democratic. There's only a couple weak points, which I think make it a little less, put it as a little of a disadvantage to Dark Side of the Moon. But certainly they're on the right path. But it does sort of point to Roger Waters having more of an influence in the band. Going into the packaging, you can see that it has this black paper. This is the original sort of replica from the Oh By The Way box set. Has this sticker here with the mechanical handshake, which is a theme of the music industry throughout the entire album, with the 4 elements here. You open it up, this black package. Sorry, I gotta get to this. And this is the cover that most people know. It's the handshake with one man getting burned to represent, all musical deals are pretty much false and one man gets screwed in the end. And you can see there's a little char mark right there. And the back, which is not as famous anymore, is a record executive who doesn't have a face. And he's kind of an invisible man and doesn't have a soul, really. And throughout the packaging, there's sort of this theme of absence and lawning. The inner sleeve replica right here is a sort of a very pretty picture of palm trees with this sort of veil floating right there. And the lyrics are printed right here with a picture of a diver in a lake, which they reprise a lot on the Wish You Were Here immersion box set. Of what I've saw, they use that image quite a bit. So very nice packaging. I think this packaging is a lot cooler than the Dark Side of the Moon packaging, just because. Oh, and it also comes with a postcard with the picture of the diver. So I think the cover is the packaging is a lot cooler and a lot more elaborate than Dark Side of the Moon, and I like it a lot more. I like the cover of Dark Side of the Moon though a bit more than this, but this is still very iconic. So overall, I would give this album a 9 out of 10. Very strong. They could have done a couple of tweakings with them. Some of the things made everything a bit more concise in some of the places. But overall, it's a very strong album. A very good introduction to Pink Floyd. Either this or Dark Side of the Moon. So, this is Mr. Maxim's Film. This is my review for Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. And I'm going to try to get a review of the Rolling Stones' Aftermath after this. And I'll see you guys next time.